No trip to Dayton would be complete without a visit to the Oregon District, with its Newcomb's Tavern, named after the very first bar in Dayton. But one of my favorite spots down here used to sit on this property. It was called Sloopy's, probably named after the Ohio State University Buckeyes fight song, Hang On Sloopy. It was here in the mid-90s where I met aircraft pilots for the first time. But these pilots were not speaking English. They were speaking Russian. What were Russian pilots doing in Dayton, Ohio in the mid-90s, you ask? Well, they were here with the Russian Federation supporting the signing of the Dayton Peace Accords that ended the war in Bosnia. How amazing is it that the birthplace of aviation was chosen as the site to realize peace in another country? Up next is a panel to talk about the business realization and value of Industry 4.0.
Thank you, Yvonne. My name is Patrick Solar, and I'll be moderating the panel today. I'm the general manager for Alton Technology. We're an engineering services company, and we'll be discussing the smart functionality in today's environment. With us today, we have Kimberly Clavin. Kimberly is the founder of Knotbox Creation and is a strategy and connected products consultant. She delivers strategies for applications and embedded solutions and Internet of Things, and tailors the engineering approach to the value of the consumer as well as her clients. After that, we have Doug McCullough. Doug is the CIO of the City of Dublin, and Doug has been involved in a lot of smart city projects around Central Ohio, including the Route 33 Innovation Corridor. He's also been involved with IT workforce development, expanding broadband and connected and autonomous vehicles, as well as blockchain in government. Next, we have Captain Robert Ty. Rob is with Siemens and the Director of Business Development, and he's responsible for the growing, implementing U.S. military depot readiness, as well as leading efforts to create digital twins of the naval shipyards, air depots, and military depots. Rob brings almost 25 years of experience with the U.S. Navy as a retired captain, as well as Civil Engineering Corps officer who worked on infrastructure, energy, and environmental programs. And then finally, we have Major General retired Brent Baker. He's with PTC, and his responsibility is to ensure PTC's amazing out-of-the-box software solutions are provided to customers, ensuring immediate and significant value. PTC remains a thought leader in federal aerospace and defense. And prior to that, Major General Baker was the Vice Commander of the Air Force Material Command at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base right here in Ohio. So our panel is mostly based on quite a wide variety of smart technologies that are out there. And we will be touching on some of those so that you'll get a better understanding of what trends companies are facing as well as manufacturers. And with the constraints of COVID-19 pandemic, it's forcing manufacturers and supply chain strategies to really accelerate the adoption of these digital technologies. So I put a slide together to show some of those emerging trends. And you can see that on the next slide, where you're seeing the influence of increasing labor shortages, forced closure of factories, disruptions in delivery routes and logistics hubs due to lockdowns, along with evolving customer behavior, are some of the major factors that are driving companies to adopt some of these digital technologies. Some of them that have the maximum benefit include artificial intelligence, big data, blockchain, digital twins, and robotics. And companies and government agencies are leveraging these to create new disruptive product offerings and service, and business models. So what I'd like to do is jump right in with Brent Baker. And Brent, can you share with us some of the smart industry trends affecting the federal aerospace and defense? For example, like data analytics or government, or some of those that you're seeing out there.
You bet. Hey, Pat, thank you. And thanks everyone for this opportunity to speak this afternoon. If you could pull up my slides, I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so just a couple things to think about, right up front. I like to kind of start maybe big and scale down, but the federal aerospace and defense landscape, it is changing, and it's really changing very quickly. I like to tell folks in this space, a motto we have is dream big, start small, and scale fast. But there's some amazing trends going on. We're in a second space race, if you will. There's a lot of new threats out there from large actors, asymmetrical actors. There's a huge skills gap now as people retire. Our partners are playing larger roles. A lot of R&D is being pushed into industry. And then you take all of that and you throw the COVID-19 on top of that. And I like to tell folks, I think a lot of these trends were already happening, but COVID has definitely accelerated them. So in our thought and our process is you really have to start with value first. And that to me is really unlocking the value. Start with really the end in mind and the business case. And then some of the technology that's out there is absolutely amazing. And so, a lot of folks act like when you retired, what was one of the things you noticed? And what I really noticed, quite frankly, is a lot of the technology that we need to solve some of our problems is readily available. And so I think, you really have to have differentiators with teeth. And to me, you got to think the entire life cycle now, end to end. It's not just about design. It's just not about systems engineering or even maintenance. It's really about thinking of this process really end to end. And that's the other thing too, is you really need really good partners. I don't think anyone can really do this by themselves, as you've got to have the right partners to be able to really make digital engineering work from end to end. And then the other thing too, that one of the really largest trends is folks are really starting to think about how we get these solutions out of on-premise into a cloud solution. Next slide. So we really look at these in we've kind of boiled them down to 5 really big areas. One is digital factory. This is an amazing trend that there's many names for it: Industry 4.0, brilliant factory, smart factory. But this digital factory, this trend is happening, and it's happening now, and it's happening fast. For instance, my company, PTC, we have helped digitize over 2,000 factories around the globe. And I tell people that, people are amazed that just one company has done that many factories. The other thing is digital engineering. Everyone is talking about digital engineering. Most of you probably saw Dr. Roper's discussion last week or week before around digital engineering. DoD released a really good brochure on that. But digital engineering is really occurring across all federal aerospace and defense, from commercial airlines even into the major OEMs. I also mentioned the cloud. A few years ago, people were talking a little bit about the cloud, but they weren't necessarily really interested in it. Well, today, the cloud and cloud adoption is very significant. And of course, with JEDI still pending, folks are really figuring out what can we put in the cloud, and that's very important. The other one I would mention is additive manufacturing. A few years ago, I like to call that a mini wave. It was small. People used to print things, set them on their desk, and say, "Hey, isn't that cool and really unique?" But today, companies are doing additive manufacturing really all over the globe in all processes, and even in some safety of flight areas. But additive manufacturing is really a game changer. It's going to be very disruptive technology. And then the last one I would mention is just knowledge retention. We have an older workforce now, or more senior workforce. A lot of folks are leaving the industry, and especially in manufacturing. A lot of young folks are coming in. It's very hard to attract and retain and train these young folks. So we just believe, like, this knowledge retention, the way we attract, hire, and train people is going to be significantly different today than it was, just even 5 years ago. Okay, if I could go to my next slide. And I would just mention that, a lot of folks like to say, well, this technology is coming, it's coming down the road. But I will just mention it is here, and it is here in a big way. A great example is we just signed a deal with the United States Navy, NAVSEA, around digital thread, digital twin, and it's really replacing a lot of their old, outdated government system, GOTS systems. And so this is an example of DoD really embracing. Again, we talk about digital thread, digital twin, IoT, digital engineering, but this is an example of one, customer, a DoD organization that says, you know what, we're going to do this digital thread end-to-end solution. And so these trends I mentioned, I guess my final point is I just want to make sure folks understand that these are things coming down the road. They're here today and here in a big way. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that definitely a lot of the adoption of digital technologies is happening at a much faster pace. And Rob, I know you've been working on some of those smart scenarios at the depot level. Can you share with us some of the things that you've done around the digital twins?
No, thank you, Pat. Appreciate it. So we're currently working to create digital models of the Navy shipyards and the naval air depots. What we have found is, what are the reasons that we would want to improve the throughput, or how would you improve the throughput at these depots? And capturing or having a connected work floor where you have machines, connected to the business systems of these depots, of these shipyards, is increasingly important. And as Brent just mentioned, that there are a few reasons actually to do this. One of them is capturing tribal knowledge. There is an older workforce out there. There were challenges in hiring in the depots for decades, and then you have this new workforce coming up. So digitally capturing the knowledge of your senior workforce and putting that in the form that the younger workforce can use is important. The skill, the things that are noticed by the senior workforce could be items missed by the younger workforce while reassembling ships, aircraft, tanks, etc. Another reason for having a connected shop is just maintaining and managing the equipment you have out on the floor. And what we've noticed is that there could be better information provided to leadership as to how often certain equipment is used, who's using that equipment and for what purpose. And all that leads back to a quality assurance, quality control, and a feedback mechanism to the artisans about how the work is being performed and how you can track work. Connected workforce also feeds into your ERP. Connected equipment, feeds into your ERP and your MES systems, and therefore you can track repair going through the depots. And it's really about the throughput of the depots. What can improve that throughput? And until you start tracking the data, that becomes difficult. What do you do with all this data is also really important. And creating digital models or digital twins of the depot of the repair process, it's different than an object. It's the actual repair process, which is resource constrained by people, equipment, material, and also constrained by the processes of the depots themselves, their rules and regulations. Having a digital twin of that and then being able to accurately reflect what's actually going on in the depot, and then using that digital twin to do what-if scenarios we found is important. When depots want to buy new equipment or make major infrastructure upgrades and repairs, it's great to have a digital twin to test that theory and make sure that it's delivering the goals and the metrics that the service wants. And that's really important because dollars have always been tight and they're still tight now. And before you spend tens, hundreds, or billions of dollars on a new depot upgrade, you need to know how, and you need to have the assurance that it's going to give you what you're looking for.
So Rob, do you have a slide for like a 3D visualization? Maybe we can put that up. Is that is this a representation of what you mentioned as a digital twin?
No, thanks, Pat. That's exactly right. So this slide, and in here it's not animated, but when it's animated, it shows the people, the equipment, and the material storage moving through a factory. And this is just any kind of factory. This is the glossy version. This is the 3-dimensional one to help leadership visualize what's going on. But it's not just the people, it's the material coming into the factory, where it's stored afterwards, and how things are done efficiently. And capturing specifically the workforce is really important. That's usually a big constraint, is the skill level of the workforce and where those people are. We've also found there's a lot of older equipment in the depots that can't necessarily be purchased new or upgraded and bought new. So that equipment can be advanced, modernized, but you'll always have an artisan working with that equipment. So we see there's a lot of factory automation, tracking of materials, and then data collection that would help improve the throughput of our shipyards, air and land depots. And so, Pat, we really think it's important that the depots become more digitally friendly.
Yeah, and I can see how, with from a learning aspect, if you have a digital model or 3-dimensional model, you'll be able to train people in a more effective manner. You'll be able to communicate what the process flow should be. So that's very interesting. And I know we talked a lot about, data and the importance of that, and also that workforce development. And Doug, you're a CIO of a large city that has been implementing, kind of a major smart city, smart corridor project. Can you talk about maybe some of those lessons learned around, that data governance and workforce development, and maybe even touch on the blockchain work that Dublin is doing?
Absolutely. Is that all? Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
Can we bring up, there's a slide describing the 33 Smart Mobility Corridor, and if we could pull that up, I'd appreciate it. And I want to express agreement with everything that Rob and Brent just said. And I hope our audience and us as a panel can draw alignment between these different things when we talked about doing this panel. When you get down to it, there are very little differences between a city, a factory, a university campus, large institutions. And that's what this is about. I hope that people will think of a city as an enterprise. And I, as a technologist, often think of a city as a stack, a technology stack. And I just correct you a little bit there, Pat. City of Dublin is a small city, not a large city, but big enough to keep us all confused and trying to keep everything in good order. Just briefly, as briefly as I can, the 33 Smart Mobility Corridor, if folks have not heard of it, is a 35-mile stretch of fiber. The intent there is to put an infrastructure in place that makes it possible for the testing of connected and autonomous vehicles and a number of other goals. From an infrastructure point of view, it's a redundant fiber loop that includes a 432-strand fiber cable that we're splitting up between the partners of the project. It's about 98 RSUs, or roadside units. It utilizes a wireless standard to communicate with the vehicles, dedicated short-range communications, DSRC, and hundreds of onboard units that go in the vehicles themselves, which communicate to them. We have a couple of opportunities to test some technologies or really some data sharing kind of and analysis kinds of things. As an example, red light warning, pedestrian crossing warnings, those kinds of things. One of the things that connected and autonomous vehicles have not been measuring that much yet are things like near misses and patterns of what's happening at some intersections where we think we know what's going on, but what we really measure is accidents and injuries. We don't measure the effectiveness of that intersection and how it's been planned out. And so this is the generation and gathering of data that's going to allow us to do analytics at a far higher level than we have before. And once again, calling back to the concept of the city as an enterprise, we often think of a city as unrelated operations and activities and technologies. We need to begin to think of it, as has been said, like a shipyard or a big battle cruiser or something enclosed that we can actually measure and work with. The project includes a human-machine interface so that drivers can be communicated with and city staff can be communicated with about the data that's being gathered on essentially mobility. This is an opportunity to do multiple environments. So not only rural or not only an urban environment, but ex-urban and rural, so that the equipment goes outside of the city of Dublin. It is managed by a council of governments that includes the city of Dublin, the city of Marysville, Union County, and the Union County Port Authority. And so we have these kind of different types of environments, even different types of governments, that if you could test your vehicles and your data and analytics within them, we feel you get a much richer kind of experience. Other partners of the project include the Ohio Department of Transportation, Drive Ohio, Federal Highway Administration, the U.S. Department of Transportation, Honda R&D, the Transportation Research Center, Battelle, the Ohio State University Center for Automotive Research, Logan County, and we also partner with Purpose. These technologies and infrastructure allows, essentially the project is about making a smart infrastructure. I've been doing infrastructure for a long, long time. And, you hook wires up to computers and you build roads, and infrastructure is kind of a dead technology in theory. We're trying to build a smart infrastructure that is a lot more innovative. Obviously, a key goal is improving safety. This project actually also improves fiber connectivity. So while the goal here is kind of smart mobility, the laying of fiber in the interest of smart mobility actually extends broadband networks that can be used for all sorts of different smart activities. I don't have too much time to talk about the different kinds of mobility, but it includes more than just vehicles or automobile vehicles and trucks. We also have the opportunity for unmanned aerial vehicles. And so there's a lot of drone
we have when we're trying to add maybe the user experience and what the customers might be expecting. We may have lost Kimberly there for a moment too. So
well, you have me. I don't know how long I was out.
Okay.
I do apologize.
Yeah, Doug, you did come out a little bit. Oh, there, she's coming back now. So
Okay.
Kimberly, are you there? You're on mute, I think. Yeah. Yeah, I think she might be frozen too. There she goes.
Okay, so am I back?
There you go. Yep, you're back now. There we go.
Okay, good. Okay, good.
Yeah.
That was
So Douglas,
right when
I
my
don't know if
time
you,
comes up, I get muted.
So I don't know if you heard the last portion or towards the end of Doug's discussion, but he was talking about like all of the different partnerships that are involved in the Route 33 corridor, whether it's the government sector or the private sector. And I know you've created a lot of, been involved in a lot of non-traditional partnerships. And also, you know, a lot of these smart initiatives involve a lot of the customer expectations and the user experience. So maybe can you talk a little bit about like maybe some of those lessons learned from some of those non-traditional partnerships?
Sure, yeah, definitely. Thank you, Pat. And yeah, I love this panel because it really is encompassing all different aspects of connected technology. So I think I actually have some slides as well, if we want to pop those up. By the way, I've had a first in conferences. My pen literally exploded as I was taking notes. So there's a high chance that I have black all over my face. So
not so far. You look good.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's kind of like, whoa. So customer expectations are changing, and they're changing so quickly. How do you as companies keep with that? How do you keep agile enough that you can keep up with the consumers? And that's really through this connected technology and all the data, as we mentioned previously, that's coming out of that, and getting the right data out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how companies are accomplishing that in industries that may be out of your own. But this is really a B2C example, which may not be as applicable as B2B in some cases, but we're going to sort of extrapolate it into B2B. So this is a person trying to get to the hospital. She potentially drove there, and it had with an autonomous vehicle. There's a smart parking meter. She's all connected within this district connectivity on being able to get there. And there's all these layers of technology. Now, in a B2B sense, this could be somebody on a factory line who's trying to accomplish a task, and potentially the line went down and there was 4 hours of troubleshooting what happened. You know, so the connected technology and connecting these people and the things and the data and the places is really helping with that ease of getting someplace or accomplishing a task on a factory line, and making it really simple. And I love what Doug said. He said, you know, with a shipyard, we have an enclosed space, you know, where you can kind of take some measurables, and how do we do that? And I think that we're going from having industries to having experiences as our closed space. So rather than having a car or having an object, a washing machine, instead, we will be measuring by human experience through this action of going from point A to B or doing a task. So we're gradually going to that. But to talk a little bit about partnerships, if we can go to the next slide. So here are some examples of some partnerships that I think are pretty fascinating, and there's a ton more. But these are, like I said, more B2C type examples. So Google and Levi coming together to make a jacket. And I've been following this one for years. It was originally called the Jacquard Project, and they've still left Jacquard in the name of the jacket. But it's a jacket that has a touch sensor on the sleeve, so you can change the radio station, you can answer your phone, etc. And that was the reason I really like that one, is because it was a very early partnership of two companies that you normally wouldn't think coming together. And they really did struggle a lot initially with culture and mostly like scale, because you can't wash the piece that goes on the coat. You have to figure out how can people take it off. So there were a lot of challenges in that respect. Another one is the Alphabet Logitech P&G example. They were at CES this year demonstrating this diaper. And what it does is it's got a Velcro with a sensor on it. And the sensor feeds wetness and sleep patterns to the parent's phone, and it does auto subscription reorder, etc. Again, a lot of cultural challenges here, because you've got a traditional company doing product development meshing with a technology company who generally probably don't even have the same type of project management. One's doing waterfall, one's doing agile. So how do you get these two together to operate at the same pace and learn each other's ways of working? It's a really complicated thing to do, but people have great processes to go about it. So, and as you can see from the success of the diaper, the BMW Louis Vuitton, that one's kind of interesting. There's a couple that are kind of one-off interesting ones that you'll see out there. This was luggage that they made specific for your BMW. It very much fits, and there's all sorts of fancy bells and whistles behind it, but it's kind of neat that these two came together and said, hey, we're luxurious brands. Let's come together and do something. And so there's luggage that's specific to the car. That's interesting. So Uber and Spotify, this one, you can play your list automatically when you're on an Uber trip. So you pre-populate it, and when you get in the Uber, you're jamming out and you're going to wherever you're going. You're ready to hit the dance floor the minute you get to wherever you're going. But there are all sorts of partnerships of this sort where it's companies that traditionally are into this product that maybe isn't connected, most likely is not, but then they partner with a technology company or somebody offering a technology company to get an all-encompassing experience. But we're getting that even more and more so, not just with a couple companies come together. And to Doug's point, especially, I'm quite familiar with the 33 Innovation Corridor. It's not just about the autonomous vehicles, it's about the ease of travel and all the aspects that come around it. So there's a lot of partners that have to come to that table that from the different fields and areas to make it happen. So if you go to the next slide, really what consumers are going for, and this is in the B2C and the B2B market, is that rather than being in this if mode, like if my car breaks or if I trip when I'm working or I hurt my back when I'm working, I want good medical insurance, to going to avoid my back being broken at work. Tell me when I'm lifting a box that's too heavy. So all of this technology is helping us to really get to the customer expectations of preventive and being proactive with where we're going. So yeah, that's what I had to talk about.
Well, I think that's very fascinating and really even shows that the private sector innovations could apply even to the military side of things. I definitely could see, Air Force pilots using the sensors that in the uniforms and things like that, or the equipment automatically telling them to avoid collisions or giving them basic safety messages that might be there and things like that. I'm sure a lot of our audience is kind of figuring, all these things are great, but, how do they get started? And Rob, what do you think is a place that people normally start when they're thinking about some of these smart initiatives? How do they get started?
No, thanks, Pat. So what we've seen is most of the work we're doing, most of the initiatives start actually small. At Hill Air Force Base, we were working a digital model where they had a specific plating shop and they wanted to know what the NEPA scenarios would be. So it was modeling a plating shop to see if they move things around, how could they conform. When we were working at the Marine Corps Air Base at FRC East in Cherry Point, they wanted to model a blade shop and a hydraulic pump shop with the new aircraft coming on. They wanted to make sure they had the throughput, or would they have to build a new building, military construction approved by Congress, in order to help the work throughput. So again, we modeled just a couple of components there for them to kind of show how they could do it without new construction. At Corpus Christi Air Depot, again, Army Depot, again, we're looking at doing a plating shop again for an energy savings performance contract. So how could we reduce energy? How can we make the cost lower and have a better ROI for the factory? What NAVC did with the 4 shipyards is they went big. Theirs was all 4 shipyards, and they wanted us to model an availability or the work throughput through the shipyard when it's fully loaded. And that was to because their concern was infrastructure. What new infrastructure was needed at the shipyards? They wanted the shipyards to be common and have the same work practices. And so we were modeling how the infrastructure affects all 4 shipyards. So that's a much larger project. And NavAir, based on the air depots, going back to the air depots, they came back and said, okay, let's do all 3 air depots. We now have confidence in a few processes. Let's look at the whole thing. So, it usually they start small. Industry also starts usually small and leads larger. I would also say that it's a commitment in time by the depot or industry, because they have to validate the work that we're our team's putting together, and that's there's a lot of buy-in there. It can be difficult for the workforce to accept sometimes. Also, every factory thinks that they're unique, and they are, but there's commonalities too. And so working through the process is important, and we need to work through each shop, each depot, and you can't just cookie cutter what you learned at one across others. You need to work with all the depots. So there's a learning process as well.
Gotcha.
So coming back to you, Pat, a lot of times they start small. Even when they start big, it's an introduction and a learning curve.
Right. Yeah, and I can imagine, if you're a champion of one of these products, you're going to have to challenge the status quo, but then also get stakeholders to adopt that digital transformation strategy. And Doug, when you were looking at, the initiation of the smart corridor, how did you kind of get buy-in from your stakeholders, and did you have to challenge people with the status quo? I mean, normally smart roadways aren't a new thing out there.
Yeah, I think what we were challenged by is just not a lot of great knowledge about what smart mobility was as a concept. So there was a learning curve. I do want to go back to something Brent said in the beginning. He said really starting huge at the universe level and just really saying, let's just look at the whole big thing and think from that perspective. And then also thinking about extracting value. He said those 2 things. The other thing then is starting really, really small on things that you can prove and those kinds of things. We did have a grant opportunity. And so I have to give kudos to the federal government for understanding that local governments were not going to just move forward on these things. They put money on the table. And so that really helps. That's Federal Highway Administration saying, if you do these things, we will put up this money. And that helps local communities see the value behind what they're trying to do. But the barriers, some of the barriers that we face, we were talking about economic development. We were not talking about connected and autonomous vehicles. When you combine a value like economic development, attracting or retaining companies that are in automotive manufacturing, those kinds of things that we have in Ohio, with something like safety, public safety, driver safety. We talk a lot about distracted driving and those kinds of things. Also construction worker safety, also truck driver safety in terms of knowledge of where they can pull over and rest. And all of those things were on the table. That made it very easy for us to come together as a group of communities and realize that we needed to put our differences down and focus on this opportunity, because it really is a regional opportunity to extract value.
That's very interesting. When you talk about leaders trying to put some of their differences aside, it kind of makes me wonder, like, how do leaders succeed in a disruptive world like this when things are changing so quickly? And, Kimberly, when you're working in the private sector, how did you see like some of those leaders, make changes and really figure out how to succeed when things are changing so quickly on the technology side?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I imagine being towards the end of this conference, people are thinking, oh my gosh, this seems like a lot. I don't even know how we would go about this. And so you start to put up the walls of like, it's just, we can't do this. Especially when you start thinking, I think one of the number one challenges that has companies stop is the issue of privacy, data and privacy, and also data ownership, who owns data. Those pieces will almost just shut down innovation because we don't want to tackle it. We don't know how to tackle it. It just seems like too much. So my advice to leaders would be to have that no constraints mindset to be able to work through it. Because there are professionals that have gone through this that know the process and things that you could do. I wouldn't automatically just shut out the idea of doing anything connected for your organization or going this approach of digital strategy. But the other thing I would say, so some of the top challenges are scale, privacy, process, culture, and talent. So that seems like a lot. Oh, there's just a little bit. Those are the only challenges. You got this. Yeah, no worries. Process. That's easy to talk about, right? Yeah. But my recommendation to get through this is really the thin slicing. And Doug kind of touched base on this too. Don't try and boil the ocean initially. Come up with that little piece. Well, first, spend a lot of time on strategy. That is one thing. Jumping into development can sometimes be detrimental because you really do need to develop a really good value stories, road mapping, data monetization strategy, what data you need, what sensors you're going to need to get the data. So all of that has to be up front, which is all part of that process. But taking it in thin slices, coming up with a way to just do a little bit to get your feet wet, and then growing upon that as you go and getting better at the process and sort of growing it within the organization or with other projects. The other thing that I see a lot too is how should we acquire companies? Should we partner with companies? Should we grow an innovation center internally to do this and have kind of a growth of an innovation center? Companies of all sorts are doing it differently, and they all have successes in their different ways. I do think the acquisition method works quite well from what I've seen. Sometimes internal innovation works, sometimes it's not as successful. It depends on how you set it up and how you empower people within the innovation center. And sometimes you hire out the innovation, so consulting firms. They're all great methodologies, so I wouldn't shut any of those ideas out. But again, I would take the thin slices. And also, like I said within the presentation, is considering strategic partnerships.
That's very helpful. I think it's more like the additive manufacturing approach where you're layering on, and with the strategy, you know that you're going in the right direction. So that's very helpful. And I think, a lot of these initiatives, people are fearful, like you mentioned, from a leadership standpoint, and not always having all the information. But I know like there's a lot of benefits to adopting this digital transformation. And, Brent, maybe you can address, what is the, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and what benefits can people see by implementing some of these?
Well, I think there are many benefits. One of them is this, this technology is here, and folks at some point have to embrace it. I like to tell folks, at one time we used to go to work with a horse and buggy, and you could still do that today. You could get a horse and a buggy, you could still get to work. It would be very painful, take you a long time. So we all embrace, the automobile. Now, I'm sure there were folks at the time saying, do I really want to embrace this? But in the final analysis, a lot of this comes down to return on investment. And I think all the panel members have done an amazing job of really kind of laying that out. You really have to develop a business case. And just a quick couple of examples we've seen. A major aerospace company is getting ready to add a lot of capital investment equipment to their plant, and they did a brilliant factory IoT inside their factory, and they found out they didn't need to buy anything. They just needed to utilize the equipment they had. Another great example is a major aerospace company decided, hey, we need to do a better job of handling baggage. And once they figured out how to do baggage handling, they said, we could use this same technology on our jet bridges. And if we can get our aircraft, to the jet bridge faster, get it hooked up faster, that saves millions of dollars, millions of gallons of gas, and millions of dollars, in cost savings as well. So, to me, I think in the end, the reason you want to do this technology is because there is great value in doing that. And we see this all the time with folks that it is a plunge. You have to take the plunge. But after they do it, they're always thankful that they did.
Oh, that's very helpful, and we're coming up on the end of our panel discussion. So, as we're hopefully coming out of the COVID pandemic, I'd like to give everybody maybe a chance to share some of their parting thoughts on what do you think the impact, on the business value of these smart initiatives might be. I did have a slide that shows like some of the 10 questions for embracing like what the new normal might be. And so Doug, maybe you can kick off. And what do you think, your parting thoughts there on the impact to the business value of some of these things?
Sure. One of the things we're noticing, or several things we're noticing from a public experience, is that touchlessness is becoming far more important. The ability to give people services or experiences where they don't have to be next to each other, shorter lines, distance. They don't have to touch things like doors and computer screens, and those kinds of things are becoming pretty important. Also, sharing data with the public has never been more important. It sounds trite, but the truth is that people are really freaking out, and it's up to us as a public sector to provide timely, accurate information, as well as feedback loops, so that people can feel confident in their public experiences. So none of those things were on your list there, but those are key things that we're noticing as a city and a local government.
Yeah. Great, thanks. Kimberly, what do you? Might have lost Kimberly. Rob, what do you think?
So we think, I think, so a digital model of like COVID or of your factory would help you respond to cases like COVID or anything else that's unexpected that comes up. And so how do you put in new processes in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic? Could be digitally modeled. If you have a surge because of an accident, or you need to put higher throughput through your depots, can be modeled so that you can react properly and send the right ship to the right shipyard or the right aircraft to the right air depot. So that's the COVID-19 experience is teaching us, I think, that there has always been things that upset your process, the way you normally do work, and how do you recover? So, excellent. Thank you.
Brent, what do you think?
Well, Pat, you ask an interesting question about why you should adopt this. I think COVID has really illustrated that fact. And in some regards, I said it earlier, it's really accelerated some of these trends. A great example directly related to COVID, when there was a challenge called the Ventilator Challenge in Europe. So that those folks were able to collaborate remotely using an online, like a CAD system, and then be able to train their folks using an expert capture tool, which is a digital training tool. They were able to train hundreds of people literally around the globe at the same time. So, I thought Rob made a really good point. Sometimes you got to do some of this technology because you are preparing for some of the unknowns. And so again, this type of technology, it helps you better prepare for the inevitable.
That's great. And Kimberly, did you have one parting thought before we go into break?
Well, I just love what you just said, because you're right. One of the things that also, besides, I love what Doug said, touchless, mobile services, remote work, all of those things are obviously big, transparency and data, but also the issues with supply chain are a big piece. And so if companies had prepared for something like this through digital technology, there could be better real-time supply chain, diversification of supply chain, and a lot of those problems we're currently having could be alleviated, but if we were to have prepared with some sort of predictive analytics and doing the supply chain piece. So I just wanted to add that. I think that was in the list as something that we're seeing, because some companies are really doing great, and they're suffering because they can't get the parts that they need right now.
Right. Yeah, this hour went by very fast, didn't it? So I appreciate everybody participating in this panel.